So, welcome to another episode of Saints Edified, and we're also playing this on the Redeem Project Radio Network. So, if you're listening to us on the station, I want to thank you once again for tuning in. Today, we have a special video episode. Once again, we've been doing these almost every week now, and today I have two guests that I'm very excited to talk to and discuss things with. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys that Saints Edified and Redeem Project Radio is a listener-supported ministry. We can't do this without your guys' support. So if you guys can, look in the links below. We have a Patreon page and a GoFundMe page. Feel free to email me, saintsedified@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, anywhere. Today, I have a special discussion with two brothers who are, I think, going to do something great with their ministry. So we have Justin and Rolland from TheoTalks, and some of you may not know what TheoTalks is because they haven't uploaded an episode yet, but they will. But however, I checked them out and I've been talking to them a little bit. I'm actually really excited about what they want to do. So, but before we start talking about the ministry, I want you guys to know a little bit about them, what they do, maybe even a testimony, and yeah. So I don't know. So Justin, I don't know, or Rolland, if you guys want to go.
Yeah, go ahead, Rolland.
I'm Rolland Hart. I guess the genesis of TheoTalks kind of happened. It was a thought of mine a long time ago to do a podcast or a video podcast of some sort, because I saw the need for it. I would watch other people do podcasts and different things like that, and I can tell you I've learned a lot from people that actually do and present the gospel as it should be presented or as it's written in the Bible, by podcasts and different things like that. So I said, that's something that I feel like maybe I might be called to do. I mean, there are different people that are called to do different things. There are people that are called to be pastors, people that are called to be, just all kinds of different things. And I feel like if I had to, ascribe something to a calling, then I guess, something along these lines here, would be it. I mean, if I even go back to my high school days, where, I was in high school, I was on the AV team. So audio video has always kind of been my thing. Even since high school, every time I was in a church, I would always be on the AV team. So that right there, God kind of lets where he's got you going just by, kind of the things that, you kind of are interested with in your life. So I feel like, like I said, the genesis again, for TheoTalks, which actually is the idea, between, Justin and I, but, prior to Justin and I was always kind of interested in doing something along these lines. And then, fast forward, Justin and I end up in a book study together through a sister of ours who I was in a book study with, and she introduced me. She's like, hey, I have this guy, Justin, and he wants to join this book study. They're in South Africa, right? So we're doing a Zoom book study of Joel Beake's Reformed Systematic Theology.
Nice.
And, so Justin comes on, and after sitting through, a couple of book study sessions, I was like, man, he really knows, his stuff, and he's real passionate about this. And then something all of a sudden, I was just like, why don't you ask him to do a podcast? It's
cool.
been on your heart or something like that. And, you've gone as far as to purchase the mic and stuff like that, but you never did anything with it. So I was like, maybe Justin will push me a little bit further. And, maybe we'll take this thing, to the next level. And he did, as you can see, he's the reason this camera I have is here. He's the reason this light I have is here, all these different things. He's the reason why we've got all these pieces and everything together where we're actually able to do these videos and stuff like this, as we're doing now. So that's kind of like the genesis of, from my perspective of how, this kind of, took off. And then, Justin has been real, just out front about getting everything rolling. I mean, as far as getting us here and the design and stuff and different things like that. And I mean, all those things he's been real instrumental in, and just like kind of leading the pack. And so it's like God knows who to match people up with, when he's got to work. He's going to finish his work no matter what, no matter how lazy I am with the work that he started in me. He's like, Roland, this is what I want you to do. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want me to do? And he's like, yeah, sure, it's what you want to do. You go ahead and do it. And so now if I were to start with my kind of like a brief testimony of myself, I mean, I think all of our testimonies will be typically the same because the underlying problem is the same for all of us, which is sin. So, I would say, growing up in my household, I mean, it was just typical. I mean, would I call my household Christian? Not really.
Mm.
Did we go to church every Sunday? No. Did we go to church pretty much on the holidays and holiday Christian? Pretty much. It was, mainly my mom. I can't remember my dad going too much with us, but he did go sometimes. But that's not my idea of a Christian household. Did we talk about Christ, and did I learn any, Christ or about God or anything through my parents? No. So that would be me kind of aligning with not having a Christian household per se. Then of course you do the things that you do when you're in your sin nature. I mean, growing up, you just doing the things that sin brings, sex outside of marriage and this, that, stuff like that. And, in my sin state, which was before Christ, well, actually my wife at the time, we had a daughter. We got married, we lived a sinful life, we got divorced, right? Walk forward a little bit further. I'm, by myself, kind of, just doing my thing, working, through life, still not saved or anything like that. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. That's not true, because what actually prompted me starting to go to church was the fact that I did get divorced and I had a daughter, and I had to kind of see my life from a different perspective, because I think what it was is my daughter kind of grounded me. Prior to my daughter and everything that went on, I wasn't grounded, but she kind of grounded me. So I started going to church with a couple of people that actually invited me to church. And I would say, that particular church is the church where I actually gave my life to Christ. Now, as we're walking forward, this is where I start getting to the part where, even I questioned that, early on in my salvation, where is this fruit that I keep hearing about, because it didn't seem as if it was something that had taken root. Maybe I was some of that seed that fell on the on the ground, that where it didn't take root, because I'm looking for this fruit, and because I'm still sinning, right? I still have these sinful thoughts. But see, what I didn't pay attention to, because I look back now, was God was actually working. He was working through sanctification, but it was little by little. Did I have a Paul on the road to Damascus type of salvific moment? No. But what I did have is, God working through my life over a long period of time, and then finally getting me to, to where I am now. But, backing up, I was looking for this fruit that I didn't have, and I was like, where is it? Where is it? Years and years and years. Well, actually not years, years and years. And then this opportunity comes around again, and I actually get married to the same woman that I divorced. And because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought I was supposed to remarry, I thought I was supposed to remarry her if that opportunity came available to me. But that was still me not knowing scripture. That was still me before reading the Bible. That was still me before knowing any of that stuff. Hindsight's definitely 2020. So we got remarried, and fast forward, there is a lot of stuff that kind of went down, and we actually got divorced again. I mean, it was the stuff, yeah. And needless to say, I am a single dad with my daughter. She lives with me. So, but that's kind of that's kind of where we are. But what it reminds me of is Matthew 10, I think 32 through 41, basically, where Jesus says, I come to bring a sword. I will divide households, daughter against mother, father against son. Well, I actually got to experience that, because you could definitely see what the Bible talks about being unequally yoked. When you actually have a Christian that is yoked to somebody who is not, and also how the gospel will actually divide a household. When you have a person that is 100% in the world, and outright will tell you that there are things in the Bible that I don't like. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, the Bible is an all or nothing. You either take it all and every word that's in it, every word, comma, period, whatever I said, or you take none of it. And it's like, well, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, then you can't have Christ. You want yourself. Now we get to the part where, there's a particular moment that I discussed, where I did give my, life to Christ, and that long period of time through sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
Now we hit a point here about March 2018 where I was at work, and I was actually walking around the park, like I normally do, during work. And I was listening to a sermon by John MacArthur. First of all, I don't know how I ended up on that sermon. Secondly, I didn't know who John MacArthur was. I didn't know anything about him. I just ended up on that sermon listening to a sermon on salvation by John MacArthur. And I can tell you by the end of that sermon, this is the example I give. It's like walking through a dimly lit room, and then the lights all of a sudden just kind of coming on, as if, everything was kind of illuminated. Yeah. And, that's the example I have of finally coming to an understanding, one, of what salvation truly was, that salvation had nothing to do with me, had everything to do with Christ. There was nothing I could do works wise, or trying to be good for a holy, righteous God who I could never satisfy, on my own accord. So, that was so I'm not really sure, if that was my moment, that was my particular moment, if that was my moment, or if that was my moment where I actually professed Christ, back in 2002. So, I don't know. I mean, but the good thing is I'm here now.
Yeah.
And, so.
Amen, bro.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. But that's kind of like a, little back testimony story. And, I'll pass the torch on to my brother here, Justin, and let him run with it for a little while.
Yeah. Well, before you do that, I just want to say thank you, man. Thank you for being transparent. Like, I had no idea, but everything you shared, bro, it was encouraging for me personally. And yeah, so just I just want to thank you really quick, man, on behalf of everyone listening too. Thank you for sharing that, brother, because I couldn't imagine some brothers out there feeling so discouraged to go into ministry, because of things that happen in their life, and the fact that you're pushing, strong and showing your daughter the way too, man. It's just amazing, man. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
all right, Justin.
I would firstly say, before I even get into anything about me, is like, I myself hadn't heard your testimony in that detail. So, I mean, it's crazy the things that you've had to go through, and then to see where you are now is just a huge blessing. I didn't know a single lick of any of that, besides kind of what what we've talked about in preparing for this. And so I just didn't know the details. So yeah, that's incredible. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
But so my name's Justin, and I am married to my wife Lauren. We have two boys, Judah and Oakland. Judah is our crazy, insane 3-year-old, and Oakland's our little sweet child, but has a crazy side to him as well. He's our 2-year-old. They'll both be celebrating birthdays this year, so we love them. And so I guess a little bit of a backstory to me, or let's go back with kind of the same way that Rolland did. So when it comes to the podcast itself, I kind of have my own, it had its own inception in my mind as we came to kind of where we are today. So you'll hear a little bit about it in my testimony, but I'll just share from the beginning that the journey to this podcast was kind of long for me, because I had also always wanted to do a YouTube channel. Mine was more video geared, or geared more towards video, because I have a photography and videography background. And so I naturally wanted to go the YouTube route. I wouldn't mind doing at the time a podcast, because I could just dual purpose it. I can take the audio from the YouTube and put it into a podcast. And so, but kind of the same as Rolland, I had this idea, but I never did anything with it at all. I was just kind of like, if it happens, it'll happen, and God will provide, all that sort of stuff. But I was saying it as an excuse, not actually believing that God was going to provide anything. And so that's just a little confession there. But when it comes to this podcast specifically, I just, the more and more I talked to believers, the more and more I heard just not only just a disinterest in theology, but just a misunderstanding of what its role was in the Christian life. A lot of Christians just believe, like we'll talk about later, I'm sure, that it's only for the pastor, right? It's only for the scholarly, the one that has a PhD, the ones that are fluent in Greek and Hebrew, right? That's what theology is for. And then just us normal everyday Christians are just meant to kind of limp through the Christian life without really knowing a whole lot. And so that's kind of where the birth of TheoTalks came from my perspective, is just a deep desire to see that narrative change, to see that Christians not only were made to study theology, that God has given them a heart and a mind to do that, but that they actually love it, and not love it for theology's sake, but love the one that they're learning about, to grow deeper in their knowledge of who God is, what they've done for what God has done for them, so that way they could then lovingly serve others. And so that's the whole point of TheoTalks, is to take these theological concepts, whatever they may be, and boil them down to a level that the person that hasn't gone to college for this, or doesn't have a degree, or didn't grow up in a church that taught theology, that they could understand this, so that they can then go to the scriptures themselves and see these on the pages of scripture. So just that it's not just this abstract, in our head sort of thing. And so that's kind of the path to the podcast for me. But as far as just a background little testimony of myself, I was a home to a single mother. I was adopted when I was about 5 weeks old, from a very poor home environment. And my mom, at the time, my adopted mom, she was very young. I think she was, 23, 24 when she adopted me. When I was about 2 years old, my mom and I moved out to Maryland. She was in the military, and so she was stationed out in about 30 minutes from Washington, D.C. on a naval base called Andrews Air Force Base. I'm sorry. And that's kind of where we lived for a little bit. And all at, during this time, we were in church. So did I grow up in a Christian home? I would kind of say the same thing as Rolland, is not really. Even though we were at church every Sunday, we were a part of the choir. We did Bible studies. At least to my knowledge, I just know that we were at church more than just Sunday. And so, but at the same time, the conversations about God or who Christ was never really came up, at least that I can remember from my childhood. So we're living in Maryland at the time. My family is back where I live currently now, which is in Missouri. And so family's originally from here, but we lived way out on the East Coast. And so I was technically raised out there, but would come home for holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff. So but one thing about me that I realized as a kid is that I was a very curious kid. Like, I always was a question asker, right? I always wanted to get to the bottom of things. I always wanted to know why. And so I can remember asking my mom these really deep questions as a kid about, what does it mean when we die? Where do we go when we die? Is there a God? Who created him? All these things as a kid that all my other friends weren't really asking these type of questions. And so, but I just wanted to know. I just think that's how God wired me. He made me a very curious person, which will come up later in my testimony as like a really bad thing. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But so let's fast forward. We moved back to Missouri in 2003, and I was able to finish elementary school, middle school, and high school here. And so in middle school was where I guess my life kind of took a turn, not for the better. I was first introduced to pornography at the age, actually, I don't know how old I was, but I know I was in middle school. So this would have been, sixth grade or seventh grade. I was introduced to that. And that then began a long, more than a decade long addiction to pornography. And And so, especially as a growing kid, a growing boy at that, when all these hormones really start to get going in a young boy, that just amplified everything. And so I was also very promiscuous as a kid, which is just crazy to say out loud. But that was my life. That's where I lived. And so this was happening all the way at the end of elementary school, all the way through middle school, and eventually into high school. And so when I get to high school, I start attending this youth ministry called Young Life. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a really well-known nationwide sort of ministry that's geared towards high school kids. And we would meet every Wednesday. And I was invited to a Young Life club, is what they call them. And I said yes, obviously, but I said yes because I knew there were really cute girls there. And so my buddies and I were like, yeah, let's go. Like, if that's where the girls are, that's where we're going to be. And so I'm going to that every Wednesday now. And so the conversation about God has kind of opened up for me. Like I said, like in a way that it didn't do, or that it hadn't before, in just growing up in my household. So I started to hear about this man named Jesus and you know, him dying on the cross and all these things. So I was hearing the gospel, but at the time I was so dead to it just because I just loved the sin that I was in. I loved just being a flirt and doing all of those things, and also alcohol was a big part of it as well. And so fast forward all the way to senior year, I was invited to a Young Life camp. And if you know anything about Young Life camps, they are just extravagant, over the top, but in a good way. I mean, it's the kind of to remove all the distractions for kids so that we can hear the gospel clearly. So you don't have your phones. There's no TVs there. I mean, it's just intentional time spent. And it was there at that camp, this would have been 2010, that I think I clearly heard the gospel for the first time. And, you know, I couldn't tell you exactly what I remembered, but there was just this moment where I was outside, and this camp's in Colorado. It's in Fraser, Colorado. So it's sitting and nested up right in the mountains. And there's this moment where we went outside after the speaker was talking about sin. And we went outside and we turned all the lights off. And when the moment those lights cut off and all you have are the stars above you, like I just peered up, and the stars are so much closer when you're on the side of a mountain than they are here. And it was just, it was almost like I had never seen stars before. It was just phenomenal. And right now I have a tattoo of the Big Dipper on my arm because that's what I was looking at that moment. And I just broke down in tears. Now, I'm not going to, you know, say that was a salvation moment, but at that moment I knew there was something more to life than just like kind of what Rolland said. There had to be more to life. And but by the end of that week, I had stood up in front of my friends and said that I wanted to accept Christ. And so from my perspective, there had been a change, that I was, you know, this new Christian now. And for a while, coming off of what we call a camp high, you know, you come home and you're just on fire, and, you know, you get on Facebook and are talking, I love Jesus and I don't care who knows it and this and that or whatever. You know, that was me for a long time. But and then college was that fall. So this was in the summer, in June, and college started that August. And I knew from my experience at camp that I wanted to do Young Life and be like a Young Life leader, and so do the same thing that my leaders did. And so I was going through training, but I started college that fall. And that fall really opened my eyes to see that maybe that profession wasn't as real as I thought it was, because I went right back to the life that I was kind of living before. And just living in unrepentant sin from Thursday to Sunday. You know, me and my friends were out drinking and partying, and that was my life. But at the same time, on Wednesdays, I would be a Young Life leader, and supposedly, you know, ministering to these kids while I'm out completely drunk. And it all came to a head when one night I was at a party, and I saw one of my own Young Life kids there. And we just both locked eyes for a minute, and we both knew that we both shouldn't have been there. I mean, it was probably mortifying for this young girl, but for me, I was just like, that was an eye opener. that was like, man, something's off here. Like there shouldn't be a reason why I'm still willingly choosing to do these things. If I had this new experience, if I was a real Christian. And so that began the story of doubt in my life, or second guessing if I was real or not. And so I kind of was living that life for a while, and the partying got so bad I actually failed out of college my freshman year because I never went to class. And so it was that fall, so that winter break, obviously I had to go home because they're like, you can't be on campus because your grades aren't good enough. So I had to go home, which, this is the side note, but I just never seen my mom so disappointed ever in my life, to have to come home and tell her that, you know, her hard-earned money had gone down the drain because I was partying. So that was a rough conversation to have. But I came home, and I'll never forget it. There was one night where, again, this is where that being curious and being a thinker kind of comes into play. And I watched this show called Through the Wormhole, which was a show that Morgan Freeman was the host of. And he would always, you know, the premise was to ask these really big life questions, and then throughout the episode kind of dig in to see, you know, which side of the question you land on. And so this one episode, I remember it so vividly. The question was, did we create God, or did God create man? And I had never heard that, you know, question phrased that way before. And as what I thought as a Christian, I had no answer for that. And obviously you can know that it was on Discovery Channel, so it wasn't a Christian channel by any means. It wasn't leaning Christian, so you can understand where they took that question, and really just essentially said that, you know, God is just a figment of the human mind and all of these things, right? And but that completely shattered whatever faith I thought I had, to the point where that doubt was just so heavy, to the point where I soon fell into a deep depression that lasted for a very long time, a few years. And at the time, I'm dating my now wife, but girlfriend at the time, and she was along for all of this, so she kind of seen the decline in me. And it was just so bad, to the point where at one point suicide was a very real thought for me, where I said, you know, if God is not real, and I've been lied to, then there's nothing meaningful left to do at all. And so I had a plan on what I was going to do. And I had a day that I was going to do it. I remember it clear as day. It was, I had a math class, and then that was the only class I had for the day. And then after that, I was going to go home and do what I was going to do. And I planned it to where Lauren was going to be at my apartment that afternoon/evening, and that she was going to be the one to come in and find me. And I'll never forget it. I came home after that math class, and I had a piano. I don't have it anymore, but I had this electric piano and a bench that was on the bottom floor of my apartment. And above was like a little loft, like a college type loft apartment. And I remember sitting on that piano and looking up at this banister that had the railing, and I was going to tie a rope to it and just jump off. And I just remember just this thought that ran through my mind. I won't say it was the voice of God, because I don't believe God speaks audibly, just through his word. And I just had this thought come into my head that said, why do you think what you're going through is any harder than what Christ had to go through to save you? And that just kind of like stopped me in my tracks. It didn't fix everything, but it saved me that day, or else we wouldn't be here talking. And so I started seeing a counselor, and I'll fast forward a little bit. I met back with my old Young Life leader, because at the time I stopped leading Young Life, because I was leading, but then I stopped, and I told him what was going on. And he gave me this book by Tim Keller called The Reason for God. And I have it. It's on that bookshelf right back there. And I read it, and it was apologetic leaning. And so it was kind of giving the defense of the faith. And that kind of restored my soul and kind of brought this life back to me in a way. And so fast forward past that, I ended up getting baptized, I think a year or so after that, a year or two. And just I felt like I was on fire again. And so I started leading Young Life, and I led for about almost 10 years after that, or not after that, but in total about 10 years of leading. And fast forward to 2017 was when I had my, dim light or dim room and the lights come on moment where I was still struggling with sin. And I was like, man, why do I keep sinning? That was my question that it kept irking me. Like, why am I still doing the things that I hate that I do? And I just happened upon a John Piper sermon. Again, don't know how I got there, have no clue. I had heard the man's name before, but I didn't know him, didn't know what he taught or whatever. And it was a message that he gave at a Passion conference. Because at the time I really wanted to go to a Passion conference, just because I just thought that was a cool thing to do. And he gave a message, and the message was titled, what was it? Oh, the ultimate essence of evil. And so his premise was, he asked the question, at the bottom of every evil, including you're like our sin, what's at the bottom of it? And he went to Jeremiah 2 and he read where it said in Jeremiah, God speaking to the prophet Jeremiah, and he says, be appalled, O heavens, at this, be shocked, be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. So the Lord is asking the heavens above to be shocked and appalled at what he's about to say. He says, my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewed out for themselves cisterns or wells, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And he went on to describe and exegete that text to show that at the bottom of my sin was, in that moment of giving in to temptation, was a heart that says, God, I don't want you. I don't care about you. I want the things that you created, right? I mean, that's just Romans 1 all over the place, where we exchange the glory of the invisible God for images. And it was like this light just kind of like came on in my mind, and it was all of a sudden I felt like I finally understood what sin was for the very first time. And I was like, wow, but that's like me, but I do that. Like I do it in every area of my life. And it was just one of those things where I felt like if I was to describe a salvation moment, it would be this, because I finally understood my own sin, how just depraved I was, but then at the same time, how gracious the Lord was in saving me. And then I was just thrown into Reformed theology. And, once you go down that road, you never come back, and it's a glorious thing. But it's just like, I jumped head into the Reformers. I started learning more about, the doctrines of grace and Calvinism. And so it's just like, I just started to consume all of these things. And now I'm here now, 8 years sober of pornography, praise the Lord. And it's just a testament to the grace of God. I mean, the grace of God is scattered throughout my life all over the place. And I look back now, like with that hindsight that Rolland was talking about, and just say, man, like he could have left me there, but he didn't. And it's just a beautiful thing. So, I guess that's just a little bit about kind of, where I've been and where I am now.
Yeah. Awesome, brother. So, well, thank you both of you guys for sharing that. Those were, you guys shared things that were, I could tell, personal and even hard to talk about. Maybe you guys are trying to hold back a little bit on tears, because a couple times I was trying to like, hey, stay strong, man, stay strong. Come on, you're interviewing. But no, I appreciate that, guys. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted people to get to know you guys, and you guys did an excellent job, just sharing your testimony and everything. It reminds me a lot, like, because both of you are kind of similar in a way that, the gospel was introduced and you guys had somewhat understanding, but you guys still had this lifestyle that just didn't match up until like you came across a Reformed preacher, it seems like. And so that's awesome, man. I mean, I can relate to both of you guys in that regard. Please check out TheoTalks, guys. I mean, you can tell they have a testimony that's not your typical one, as far as like growing up in a church and having this nice life. They were in the gutter and God saved them, and you can tell that this is something that will be expressed a lot in what they share when it comes to theology, and also too when it comes to just preaching the gospel. So thank you once again, guys, for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was supposed to ask you guys what is TheoTalks in the very beginning, but my notes were kind of covered and I skipped over that part. So, but you guys both explained it already. But just really quickly, guys, is TheoTalks mainly going to be a podcast, or is this going to be like a video series, or like how is this going to look like?
Yeah, so the content itself will be distributed on YouTube and through a site called Anchor, which just delivers the podcast out. And so we'll be dropping those at the same time, and so they'll be available on both of those platforms. And then we'll also have a Facebook page that we'll have and play clips on, but that's not going to be our main source of video content. We want that to be the YouTube channel. And so we'll post clips, and we'll make our own quotes that we'll share on there or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we also have an Instagram, which will kind of mirror the content a little bit that you find on Facebook. But primarily it will be video and audio at the same time. So there won't be one leaning, or it's kind of even across the platforms.
Cool. Okay. Cool. All right. So and anyone who looks at your guys' Facebook page, on the bottom there's a slogan, and it says "Make theology simple." Can you guys explain that just a little bit? I know you explained it a little bit before, but do you mind explaining why that slogan? Why is that a big deal for you guys to make theology simple?
Sure. I guess for me, so when I was thinking about just the tagline, well, the tagline really came, or that idea came from RJ. His name's RJ Rodrigo. He is who designed all of our logos and did all of our social media stuff. And I sent him the original name, which was going to be just Theology Made Simple was going to be the original name. And as he was kind of working through things, he just had this idea of, because me and him were in conversation about what it was and what we were trying to accomplish. And he was like, man, I just keep hearing this phrase TheoTalks in my head, and then making Theology Made Simple being the tagline. And I kind of really liked that idea. But then I changed the Theology Made Simple to Make Theology Simple. And so that's kind of where that came from. But the reasoning behind that, at least on my end, and I'll let Rolland kind of chime in if he has anything to add. But for me, it came from a very personal place. So we didn't get to really talk about my wife at all during my testimony, but she's a big reasoning behind just this podcast in general. So going back to 2017, when I'm learning all of these things, my wife and I are married at the time. And she grew up in the church, but she's hearing all these things from me that she had never heard her entire Christian life. I mean, I was talking about everything under the sun, from, Calvinism versus Arminianism and is God's sovereignty and all of these things. And she didn't know what those were at all. And to the point where, she shared with me, and this isn't private, so I'm not sinning against her in this way, but she was just like, there were times where I didn't even know what like certain words like atonement meant. And she said, and that's coming from me as someone that grew up in the church, I never heard these words at all, but you're saying them and you know what they are. And so she felt this sense of just guiltiness. Like she felt like she was a lesser than Christian because she didn't know what these words meant. And that just broke my heart, because I'm like, it shouldn't be like that, right? People shouldn't grow up thinking that they're a lesser than believer because they didn't grow up learning these things. And so Make Theology Simple is partly out of that, of wanting to, again, take these concepts that are deep and dense. So like if you're talking about the Trinity, for example, that's not just a one shot doctrine. I mean, that's deep. There are layers to this thing that are almost shrouded in mystery, and it's really dense, but we want to talk about it in a way that someone like her, who said that she had never learned these things before, could begin to understand them and begin to chew on them and learn and grow in that way, and not feel so burdened because they didn't know what these things were. And so that's partly a reasoning behind the Make Theology Simple, was to do that. But then on the other hand, it's a plea. It's a plea from me and Rolland to other Christians to say, to not think that theology is just for the pastor, or think that it's just for the academic, but that it is for the everyday you and me sitting in the pew Christian, because God created us that way. The main reason we have a mind, and the main reason we have a heart, among other reasons, right? We use our brain to think and do things, but the primary reason is so that we can apprehend who God is and how he has revealed himself in his word. And then we have a heart because that is the seat of our affections, our emotions, and our wills live there. And that is in existence because it's meant for us to love him and adore him and grow in affections for him. And our mind feeds our heart. So our mind apprehends who God is, and then it tells our heart to grow in love for him. And then that then obviously goes out of us into our hands, and so that we go out and serve other people in love. And so it's a plea for Christians to not run away from something just because it seems like it's difficult, because it's not. It's actually very simple when we think about it. But we have to not run away from things that are complicated, because there's beauty behind struggle and beauty behind having to work at something. Because I've always heard this analogy, and I think it was actually John Piper that talked about it, where he was referring to scripture reading, and he said, most of our lives, we've all been rakers of scripture. And what he means by that is we just stay on the surface and just rake the leaves. And, they've just fallen off the tree. So they're really pretty, and we can look at them for a while, but we're raking leaves. But he's like, the deep things of God and the beautiful things of God are deep in the earth. He says, you have to be a miner. You have to mine for the gold and the diamonds that are in the scriptures. You can't just be a surface level Christian that rakes the leaves, but not going deep. And digging deep takes time and it takes effort. And so it was just simply a plea to be a miner. Don't be a person that just rakes the leaves. That can only benefit you for so long. Then at the end of your life, you're like, look, God, my pile of leaves, and it's like, we don't want to get to the end and be surprised at who God is. So I guess that's from my own perspective. But Rolland, I don't know if you have any other things you want to add to that.
I don't have too much more to add to, what, Brother Justin here has kind of given us as a, kind of a, an understanding of what, make theology simple, other than, there's a need, for people, like Justin said, to understand that this is not just for preachers, and it's not just for, people in seminary. And the word theology shouldn't be a word that we should be afraid of. It should be a word that we should embrace, just like we embrace the Bible, just like we embrace Christ. It's biblical. It is just, the study of Christ, at the end of the day. I mean, and that's all that it is. So when people say, do you study theology? It shouldn't be a thing that, is off-putting. It shouldn't be something that, kind of, makes you kind of stammer back and look, with glaze over your eyes, because you're thinking it's about to get deep. I mean, it can get deep, but it's a good deep. And the discussion, as far as, theology is concerned, or making theology simple is just, not taking theology and, simplifying it, but basically bringing it to an understanding that it's something that, as Christians, we're called to do. We're all called to be like the Bereans. The Bereans were, they definitely were into theology, and as R.C. Sproul says, we're all theologians, whether we want to be or not, from the Christian to the atheist, we're all theologians. And, so, and to be better equipped, to go and, be obedient to the Great Commission, make disciples, you really need to understand the gospel. You need to understand what you believe and why you believe it. And that comes through, basically, we say theology, biblical understanding. And that's kind of what that is, in its simplistic form.
Thank you for explaining that, guys. I appreciate it. Now, the topic that I want to discuss is, and I think it's perfect too, is nominal Christianity and the need for good theology. And I think nominal Christianity has been an issue, especially here in our country, really just in the West, because it's so normal to be a Christian. It's so normal to say, hey, I'm a Christian just because I go to church on Sundays or anything like that. So nominal Christianity, for those who don't know, it just means that you're Christian only by name. That's the most basic definition. But I think we're going to take it a little bit further. Normally,